Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pulta.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer released her much-anticipated roads funding plan this week.
That's after House Republicans released their own version.
It's setting up, perhaps, maybe, the possibility that we may see an actual bipartisan roads deal in the year 2025.
And it was exactly 10 years ago, Zoe, that we followed along as then Governor, Republican Rick Snyder, searched for a roads deal.
Yeah, we actually went back this week and looked at some of those headlines from 2015 stories of ours.
Deja vu, Snyder begins yet another week pushing for road money. And this one, another roads plan bites the dust in Lansing, and we are not surprised.
Eventually, a plan was passed. But Whitmer was not as successful when she first took office in 2019. That was after running on the platform of fixing the damn roads.
All this to say, road funding is always a hard sell in Michigan, and it has been for a long time.
But on today's show, we will talk with one gentleman who actually got a roads deal done at one point successfully in the state. But first, just what is in the latest plan from Governor Whitmer? Well, Simon Shuster of Bridge, Michigan, has the details for us, and he is here now. Hello, Simon.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So what should we know about Governor Whitmer's $3 billion road plan?
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting things about this plan is how much we don't know.
Yes.
If you go back to 2019, which is about 100 political years ago, Governor Whitmer, her first big policy swing was a 45-cent gas tax increase, that this was a straightforward financial mechanism, and this was going to raise the money needed to sort of patch these long deteriorating roads. This time around, she said that she wants $3 billion from roads. The major chunk of that, she says, is she wants $1.7 billion of those dollars to come from the business community. And she wants to raise this revenue. But how that's going to happen, specifically what taxes are going to be levied, if there's going to be an increase in existing taxes, or if there's going to be levying of new kinds of revenue generating mechanisms, she's leaving that all sort of up in the air. And we compare that with a number of other revenue generating mechanisms she wants to see. She wants to see a higher tax increase on marijuana. She even put on the table taxing online advertisements, something that's been tried in at least one other state with some popularity and a lot of contention as well. And so it's an amorphous sort of outline to what she wants to see done. But really what she's telegraphing here is how much she's going to leave up to negotiation.
So the governor's plan, as you note, is not huge on specifics. But Whitmer aides say the goal is to set some broad outlines to bring to the bargaining table with Republicans. What do you make of that strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, when you look back to 2019, Whitmer was sort of wedded to this particular policy intervention, the way that she wanted to make this happen. And then as a result, it gave Republicans an easy line of attack saying that the governor was interested in raising your taxes and it's going to make you pay more at the pump. This way, it allows for some more flexibility. And it's important to note that House Republicans, who have a 58-seat majority in the state House, already have a plan on the table. They've already said some of the things that they'd like to do mostly involves diverting key economic development funds that Whitmer has championed and taking that money and redirecting it towards roads. They've essentially set the parameters of the debate to some extent, and then this is sort of a counter proposal. Now, both of them have signaled a willingness to negotiate and work towards something, but whether, both of them are able to meet in good faith, debate this out, and actually reach a compromise is really what's going to be towards the next few months.
So let's dig back into this Whitmer plan. $1.6 billion from proposed taxes on big tech. She names companies like Amazon, X, Facebook, TikTok. This is really interesting. Likely the first time we've tried anything like this as a state.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and something that is really relatively new, not just in Michigan, but across the nation. One state that we know that has attempted to implement this, a tax on online advertisements, is Maryland. In 2021, they placed a tax on companies that have $100 million or more in revenue per year. And it goes from a sliding scale from 2.5% to 10% on the revenue from these online ads. And this is something that was met with a lot of pushback and consternation, especially from the tech sector, obviously. And it's been fought over in court
It's in the
for
courts.
years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, lots of First Amendment arguments being raised saying that, you can't necessarily tax some ads, but not all ads. But it has survived legal challenges and moved through. And the thing that's really going to be difficult, I think, if this were to be implemented at the state level is enforcement. There's a lot of websites out there. It is, after all, the World Wide Web, right? And you're not going to be able to have the Treasury Department come through, look at every single website and somehow know who's being served. So that Malaysian cricket fan club that gets 1,000 ads served to Michigan per year, they're probably not going to be looking to seek out the Treasury to file a tax return with the state of Michigan. But
Right.
the sort of oligopolical structure of our internet works in their favor. About 60% of all U.S. ad revenue comes from just three companies, Google, Meta, and Amazon. And so if you sort of go after the big players here, you're going to have a much easier job capturing some of that revenue.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, there's also this wholesale tax on marijuana. Reminds us back of pot for potholes. But some $470 million, she's saying, could come from that. And then another $500 million in unspecified cuts. So let's turn to that Republican plan, which you alluded to. House Republicans have their own. What we should note is that the amount of money that House Republicans have put out, $3.1 billion, is not all that dissimilar to the amount that Whitmer has put out, $3 billion. But just the makeup of how we get to those billions is what is different and where the negotiating is going to happen.
Yeah, that's correct. And of course, that's the fundamental difference here in the outlook here. One of them calls for the raising of new revenue, bringing in additional money into government, whereas House Republicans simply want to redirect money that's already been done from a popular whipping boy of theirs, which is the hundreds of millions of dollars of funds in the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Fund, the SOAR Fund, basically tamping down all of the surplus funds in the general fund, and then also taking money from corporate placemaking funds. All of these little potpourri of economic incentives that Governor Whitmer, often in concert with legislative Republicans, have erected over the years as business attraction tools. These are the things that conservatives have largely turned against over the past few years and see as sort of corporate welfare. And on sort of a populistic note, they've turned against them and saying that, this money should be used towards people. And so they want to see instead this money redirected and taken away. But economic development, the idea of attracting major investments to the state, has become such a major pillar of Governor Whitmer's second term in office that I think that that's something that's she's going to be very loath to even approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just before we let you go, recent reports have said the state needs some $3.9 billion in road funding. What do you make of the fact that neither House Republicans or Governor Whitmer went all the way up to that number?
Right. Well, I think it speaks to the challenging political environment that policymakers find themselves in right now. The idea of actually raising new revenue to make these long-term systematic problems solved in the state is extremely toxic and incredibly challenging. We saw that with Governor Whitmer's first attempt. She tried a really straightforward mechanism that would have cost motorists directly more money, but with the way that gas prices fluctuate, right? You could see gas go up 45 cents over the course of a few weeks. And I don't know if you would necessarily attribute that specifically to one policy intervention or another. But of course, political opponents would make sure that motorists are aware of those gas tax changes. So, if they're able to reach a compromise and actually bring in this additional funding, it's going to move Michigan towards where it needs to be in terms of infrastructure maintenance, getting through some of the backlog of deteriorating roads. Obviously, it's not going to solve the whole problem. It's really just going to slow some of the deterioration that we're continuing to see in our roads. It's important to note that much of the state level construction that we've seen over the past few years has been funded because Governor Whitmer, when she couldn't get the gas tax increase passed, issued $3.5 billion in state bonds. She essentially took out debt and said, I'm just going to go around and we're just going to spend decades paying off instead this debt to get some of this construction repairs done right away. While this is going to move us towards digging out from under that hole, it's not all the way there. It's definitely an incremental game, as it has been for the past decade.
Decades, we should say.
Yes.
That is Simon Shuster, politics reporter at Bridge, Michigan. Thanks so much for hopping on and filling us in on this roads plan from Governor Gretchen Whitmer this week.
Hey, thanks so much.
Okay, so it is one thing to propose a plan. It's another to actually sell it and get the buy-in that's needed. But John Truscott knows a thing or two about this.
I actually started with Governor Engler before he was governor.
Truscott is now CEO of Truscott Rossman, but before that,
I worked on the campaign as press secretary and then came into the administration with him and eventually added communications director to that title as well. And I was with him for 11 of his 12 years.
Truscott helped to package a roads plan when then Governor John Engler got it through the legislature.
not an easy task. Since Truscott has watched the debate and the controversy over road funding, I had to ask, why is funding Michigan roads such a difficult problem to solve?
I have watched it, and when we did it, you're talking about an anti-tax Republican proposing a tax, but he viewed it as a user fee. We have to pay for the roads. People expect state government to maintain them, and so it's appropriate to charge the users. It's difficult because everybody has a different idea on how to pay for it. Some people want to have their cake and eat it too. Other people want to propose a very narrow-focused type of plan, and then you have all of these special interests around, from the road builders to local governments to everybody involved who all need the money to perform their tasks. So what you don't want to do is come back year after year with constant tax hikes. You address it all at once, and then hopefully it's enough to last over several years and do what you need to do for the foreseeable future.
So Gretchen Whitmer tried that in her first year as governor, sort of come in, try to go big on revenue, and it failed. From your perspective, why was that?
I think just the anti-tax sentiment at the time. You know, if you're raising taxes, people want to know, and politicians need to be able to tell them that the money's being spent wisely and efficiently. A lot of the plans that have come out have just thrown billions of dollars around, but it doesn't really narrow down to, we're going to fix these roads, it's going to help you in your local community. The sales job part of it really hasn't been there in some of the recent plans, so people don't know what they're getting. I think if people really understand that they are going to directly benefit, their wheel's not going to fall off from hitting a pothole or things like that, then they're a little more acceptable. But we really haven't seen concrete planning and sales of what the plan is going to be. And I think that's really where it has failed continuously for the past few decades.
Well, I remember the one thing that Governor Engler did was, before he proposed a revenue solution, that he kind of went out and beat up on the road building industry to make it more efficient. Explain the thinking and the process there.
Well, the governor's office has a very big bully pulpit, and you can talk about why roads aren't being built correctly or efficiently or things like that. You know, I think one advantage that we had with the Engler administration is that the condition of roads that we inherited were so bad. Everybody was driving on highways that were pitted and full of potholes, and the local roads were awful and hadn't been touched in years. So everybody was dealing with this on a daily basis. They experienced it the minute they pulled out of the driveway. And so that frustration level was very high, and people were saying, we have to do something. So once you've crossed that psychological barrier, then it's okay, what are we going to do? There has to be a plan. Now we can talk about details. I don't think we're at that point where people are saying, our roads are terrible and I can't drive on them. The roads are maybe bad in some areas, but they're not absolutely awful. So we're planning for the future here, which is not always easy to get the public to grasp. But again, it comes down to how you market and sell the plan in a way that gets people to accept it.
So the roads may have to get even worse before there's acceptance.
Well, the old adage, don't let a crisis go to waste. Sometimes you do need to let things get so bad that the public is demanding it. I just don't have a sense that we're at that point right now. A lot of roads have been fixed. It hasn't met the promises that people thought were there. I think people think all the roads should be perfect at all at the same time, which is impossible in a state like Michigan. But yeah, I think there might have to be more public outcry to actually get movement.
So there needs to be a sales job. Explain the campaign you used before you went out and asked for road funding.
Well, this is where I'll say the media was very helpful because they were chronicling all the bad roads and all the potholes on a daily basis. It was front page of the newspapers. It was nightly news. It was everything. So that part wasn't driven by us. It was frustrating to have to deal with that and answer those questions. But what it did is raised for public awareness how bad the roads were and how necessary it was to come up with a plan. So at that point, we started pulling people together and saying, really, how much can we squeeze out of a penny of a gas tax? And then if you have multiple pennies, how much is that going to be? How can we add into contracts time limits and quality requirements and things like that? So Governor Engler really held the road building industry, held their feet to the fire and said, if we're going to give you this, we expect something in return. And that means quality, efficiency, and longer lasting roads. And he did the same with County Road Association and everybody else. Is if we're going to give you this money, you have to be good stewards of it because it's all we're going to have available. So it was more of really getting out and putting pressure on the people in the industry, in the road building ecosystem, and telling them, pressure's on you. We'll deliver, but now you have to come and really meet that promise.
And what do you do about the naysayers, the people who, as a practical matter, are always going to be opposed to a tax increase of any sort?
You know, there are always going to be naysayers. You could never please everybody all of the time. You know, I would just say, what's your alternative? You know, put your plan out there and we'll debate it. We'll talk about the good things, the bad things, why it will work, won't work. But you can't just say no. You have to put something out there for people to really discuss and debate. Otherwise, you're not going to be part of this conversation.
So let's end this conversation by talking about bargaining tactics with the legislature. It looks like there are a couple of points of agreement between what the House Republicans have proposed, led by Speaker Matt Hall, and what Governor Whitmer has proposed, one of which is making sure that all the tax revenue that's collected at the pump, including the sales tax, which right now goes to K-12 schools, is put into roads. Is that a good starting point in a very partisan environment?
Everything is a negotiation. The fact that we're now talking about roads being a priority and the total dollar amount from the House and from the governor is not that far off. So we're not that far off in the goal of what we're talking about. Now it goes to filling in the blanks. And there will be compromises. We'll be negotiating it out probably for a while. Everybody will put their cards on the table, and it's like, I'll take this that you have put out there, but you have to take what I've put out there for this category. Now we've solved $250 million of it, or, you know, whatever the number is. Now let's go to the next point. You know, the fact that they're both talking about it and they're in the same ballpark this early in the year is a very positive sign. And you know what? In the end, nobody's going to like everything that's in there. But the fact is, I do think they will get to a solution. I don't know how quickly it'll be, but they're at a really good starting point now, and I'm very encouraged.
John Truscott, CEO of Truscott Rossman. Thanks for the insights.
You're very welcome.
Okay, if there is someone who knows Lansing, really just totally knows how it works, it is John Truscott, which is why, Rick, I was a little surprised that he is so bullish on a roads funding plan actually happening right now.
Yeah, he said that the rhetoric seems to be sounding the right tones leading towards a deal, that the need is definitely there. So now it's figuring out that elusive solution. It's not a small thing, but he says not impossible.
Right. Figuring out a solution where both sides can say, hey, look, we did a thing. Mm-hmm. We have a win.
Yeah. And really at this point, it's kind of, if there's a failure, it's a failure all the way around. Or if there's a success to be had, it's successful all the way around. Mm-hmm. You know, at least that's the ideal.
Well, I don't know about you, but maybe we'll be looking back in 10 years and seeing what the headlines on this roads funding plan look like, and we will bring those to you in a decade. But for today, that is It's Just Politics. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.